morning, and it's good to have each one of you out here. For this morning, I've been listening to a couple of sermons in some of the time I've been preparing for this, and just have been really challenged. This whole thing of serving God with everything we have has been a real challenge to me, and so I want to do my best to share that with y'all today. And I want to ask you a question to start with. It was a question that Jesus asked his disciples not terribly long after he was with them. He asked them the question, who do you say that I am? And I want you to think about that for yourselves. Who do you say that Christ is? Not what have you heard that Jesus is, or who you've heard Jesus is, because that doesn't do a lot for you. Who do you say that Jesus is? And what difference does that make in your life? Just try to think about it. If someone that didn't know who God was would ask you, who is this God that you serve? Say a Muslim, or what would you say? What would your response be? So I would like to look at that passage. It's in Mark chapter 8. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn there to Mark chapter 8. And I would like to read verses 22 down to verse 20. Mark 8, starting at verse 22 and going down to verse 33. And just for a little bit of context, this is soon after Jesus had fed, I believe it was the 5,000 people, or 5,000 men, and they picked up the baskets. And they had come across the sea, and I want to jump in at verse 22. It says, Then he came to Bethsaida, and I'm reading in the New King James. Then he came to Bethsaida and brought a blind man to him, and Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him, and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he, talking about Jesus, sent him away to his house, saying, Neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town. Now Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And on the road he asked his disciples, saying to them, Who do men say that I am? So they answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. He said to them, But who do you say that I am? And Peter answered and said to him, You are the Christ. Then he, Jesus, strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. Okay, and in one of the other, and I believe it's maybe Matthew talks about, Jesus said, blessed are you for realizing that I'm the Messiah. But I want to continue on down and finish into verse 33. But Jesus said not to tell anyone. So that's kind of a question. Why would Jesus say not to tell anyone? I want to keep reading verse 31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. He spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. So, Jesus asked them who he was, or who they thought he was, and Peter answered rightly. But then Jesus kind of was going on and saying, I'm going to have to be killed and tortured and all these things, and Jesus rebuked him. And so I want to ask the question, why did Jesus rebuke him? Peter rebuked Jesus, and then Jesus was saying, Get behind me, Satan, for the words that Peter was saying. Just think about, why did he say that? I think in Peter's mind, the Messiah was somebody different. And just want to ask y'all a question. What did, from your understanding, what did the Jewish people think that the Messiah would be? I'm looking, y'all can just spit out a few things. What were they anticipating from the Messiah?
Somebody that take care of the Romans.
Okay, he was gonna, in their mind, he was gonna deliver them from the Romans. All right, what else? There was a lot of religious sects or whatever, and there was a lot of division among the Jewish people, and they were looking for the Messiah as somebody that would bring everybody together religiously, so that they could come together and be a nation kind of like they used to be, and be united so that they could fight off the Romans or whatever. There was a couple different things that they were looking, that I believe Peter was looking for in Messiah. He was looking, yes, to someone that would save their nation from Rome. They were looking for power. You think about the time when some of the disciples were arguing about who was going to be ruling with Jesus or whatever in his kingdom. Like they wanted that power, and I think Peter was thinking down the road, like we're his chosen guys. When he sets up his kingdom, we're going to get to rule with him. I believe they wanted that power to make them prosperous. There was in Rome, there was I believe they felt, what I understand, they felt sort of stifled a little bit. They couldn't live their lives like they wanted to. They wanted somebody that, not that they would demand their life, but that they would make their life better. The Jews wanted somebody that would make their life better. And isn't this sometimes a picture of what Christians here in America think Christianity is about? And I wonder sometimes, is that how we think a little bit too? We want someone that is going to make our life better, make our life more comfortable. We know that if we follow Christ, that it's usually a better life than someone that's on drugs or that's giving their lives to alcohol, that type of thing. Just a question to think about. But Jesus rebuked this when Peter said, "No, I don't want you to go die and whatever." He wanted this earthly Messiah, and Jesus rebuked him and said, "Get behind me, Satan." This idea of the Messiah was, from what it appears, that was from Satan. God had a bigger picture in mind. He wasn't just limited to here on this earth. In contrast to this view of the Jews that the Jews had of the Messiah, Jesus, he was the Savior of all nations, not just the Jewish people. He was the humble Son of Man. He wasn't about setting up his kingdom on this earth right then. He was a suffering servant. He served people while he was here. He wasn't so much about bringing everybody together. He caused divisions, and he was despised by the crowds. He was a king who conquered by dying and giving his life. So I asked the question, how clearly do we see Jesus? And kind of the title of my message that I would like us to think about, I kind of have a few different points I would like to go through, but kind of the message I would like to think about is, have we counted the cost? Do we know what the cost is of being a follower, being a disciple of Jesus? And so to count that cost, we have to see clearly who Jesus is. And so, I've kind of gone through that a little bit. And I guess it's a question I want you to think about. Who is Jesus to you? And because if we get that wrong, we're going to have a hard time counting the cost. We're not really going to know what we're even getting when we give up. These other things we'll be talking about later. And then, are we counting the cost? Do we realize what the cost is of being a disciple? And then when we made that decision, what should it do to us? So those are kind of the three things I would like to go over. Jesus, he came to earth personally. He didn't send somebody else to tell us how much he loved us, how much he wants us to be a part of his kingdom. He came personally to share that with us. And I just think that speaks of incredible love. In a dating relationship, the guy I wouldn't have really wanted to send someone to go tell Hannah how much I loved her. I wanted to be there myself and act like her. And I think that's just a beautiful picture of Jesus coming here to this earth and telling us that personally. He invited us to be his bride, but despite the thing of a lot of people believing, it's just a free gift that we can have. In a sense it is, but it also has a pretty serious cost. Nothing that money can buy, but it's going to cost everything. The cost of discipleship, like anything good and worthwhile in life, it has a cost. And so moving into this section, I would like to turn to Luke chapter 14. We turn there, Luke chapter 14. And I would like to start reading at verse 15. And again, I'll be reading in the New King James. Now when one of those who sat at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God." Then he said to him, this is Jesus, "A certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, 'Come, for all things are now ready.' But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first one said to him, 'I have bought a piece of ground, and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to test them. I ask you to have me excused.' Still another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So that servant came and reported these things to the master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor and the maimed, and the lame and the blind.' And the servant said, 'Master, it is done as you have commanded, and still there is room.' Then the master said to the servant, 'Go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come, that my house may be filled. For I say to you, that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper.' Now great multitudes went with them, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest, after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish? Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Jesus makes this pretty clear, I believe, what it costs to follow him. And another question I have for you to think about is, are we willing, or are you willing to come to Jesus on his terms? He wants everything, and I guess it was probably 6 or 7 months ago, or whatever it was, when Mr. Jason was here, we talked about this passage a little bit and went over some of the things that these 3 guys, that they needed to be excused from the banquet, they were holding more precious than going to this guy's banquet. the whole thing of land, it meant honor and reputation to them and their family. That was a big deal. Their animals, that was their possessions and wealth, kind of. For us, those things apply to all of us, I believe. We all have family and possessions, our reputation, our pride, whatever. Things that have been given to us. And do we hold those? Yeah, where do they come in our relationship with God? Jesus says that we should hate those things, and I believe the way that Greek is translated isn't that we should hate somebody, because obviously Jesus said we shouldn't hate people. But it's hate by comparison, because our love for Christ should be so high that our love for these other things is so low that it looks like hate in comparison. Is this how your life looks? Is this how my life looks? What about, the Christians we see around us? I don't know about you, but I think sadly sometimes these things are actually kind of flipped, where someone that professes to be a Christian, their love for these other things compared to their love for God, almost looks like hate, I wonder sometimes. And it's a challenge to think about this. Sometimes we hear the thing, God should be your number one priority. And I know what people are meaning by that, but I don't think that's quite an accurate picture, where it should be, God is up here, number one, and then, we have a family and maybe our job and ministry, whatever. I think, so Daryl, kind of my plumber brain was doing some thinking about this, and I drew up a little diagram, and I know it will resonate with you and Weston and anybody that knows much about plumbing. But I'm going to tape it up here and y'all can take a look at it. So this is just something that I was thinking about. How can we love God and say that we hate these other things, because these other things are good. How can God be everything, but yet we have our family that we're supposed to take care of. We have a job that's necessary. We need money to operate. And so this little diagram came to me. We put in these systems. It's called a man block. It's like a manifold system. So on the picture there, you can see the water comes in from the bottom. And I like to illustrate that as my love, or your love for Christ. So there's a pipe that comes in, and that holds all of our love for Christ. That's the main water feed in a house. And then I would like to think of that big kind of rectangle in the middle. That is God, or I think I have that written as God's kingdom. So everything should be flowing straight into God's kingdom, right? Excuse me. That's the way it should be. And then all the other things off to the side kind of flow out of that. So everything's flowing into God's kingdom, and so from that it's going to flow. He's going to give us love for our families, and He's going to give us dreams here on this earth. He's going to give us some possessions, probably, some money, land, and you can fill in the blanks there. That's just, I think I have about 6 different things written in there that I just thought of, but there's probably a lot more that could fit in there that are good things here on this earth. But what would happen if, instead of our whole love for God flowing up into that main pipe, what would happen if we would sort of divert around that main manifold, and we would go over and we would put all of our love into our families? Then, what about our neighbors or whatever that need to hear the gospel? They're not going to get any of that. And I don't know, you could probably, this illustration probably breaks down at some point, but I think you get the idea. If we would just route that love over to our hobby or something, then, where's the love for God? And, where's the energy and love that these other things need at some point, and the possessions and job and things like that. I don't know how all that fits in exactly, but I think you get my point. Is all of my love flowing straight to God and then flowing out to other things like it should be? Then Jesus, he talked about these things. You have to hate these things in comparison to your love for me. Then he gives another really vivid picture. I think the disciples and the people that were eating with him here, they got that picture really clearly. He says, let me see, in verse, let's see if I can find it here. Verse 27, and whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. And this thought, I was listening to a sermon, and the guy was sharing, what this meant to these people. They, in the Roman world there, a cross was for crucifixion. And there was, I believe, a pretty common thing. Murderers and different people would get crucified. That was the common punishment for certain offenses. When someone was carrying their cross, it's like they were on the way to death row, basically. They didn't have a future. They didn't have any hope. They didn't have any dreams. They were going to be dead in a matter of hours. And their reputation was gone. People looked at them and they're like, "Oh, you're a murderer, or you're whatever." There's no pride, there's no honor in that, right? That's what Jesus said we should do when we come to him, when we make that decision to be his disciple. That's what our lives should look like. We have no hope, we have no dreams other than serving Christ. And so if you get a hold of that picture, it's incredibly touching. And I wonder sometimes, do we take this decision a little bit too lightly? Do we put the thought into it? How much this is going to cost? And it's a serious thing. It's not just a raise your hand and accept that I'm a sinner and God can forgive me and you're saved. I don't think it's that light of a decision. Very challenging. Moving on down to verses 34 and 35, Jesus makes the comparison with salt. He said, "Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." And I was like, what is Jesus trying to say here? I understand that if salt isn't salty, then it's no good. But how does that happen? And he's talking about counting the cost and taking up your cross and dying. So I looked into how can salt become unsalty or whatever. And so the interesting thing is pure salt, which is made up of two elements. I believe it's sodium and chlorine, but I could be off on that. So sorry if that's not right. But there's two elements that are together. Normal table salt has some other stuff in it as well, but pure salt actually cannot be. It can't be diluted or it can't be made unsalty unless there has to be an electrical reaction that can make those two atoms separate, or those two molecules separate. But Jesus, a lot of people think he was talking about a normal table salt, which would have had some different impurities and things like that in it that weren't pure salt. And if rain would get on this stuff and if water would get on it, it would make the salt lose its saltiness, basically. It could be diluted that way. And I think what Jesus is trying to say here is, don't start on this goal of being my disciple if not finish the course or whatever. He says if that's what happens, this is my understanding. Somebody starts on this goal of being my disciple and decides this is too hard, I can't do this. It's like it says it's like salt that's not salty, it's good for nothing. And I don't think that's what we want. But it's a danger, and I think it's kind of a warning. He says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." So when we have counted that cost, and at some point we have to make that decision: is following God worth everything in this life? And I trust that we've made that decision. And I know for myself, it's something that I'm trying to grow in and to make Christ everything. And I believe it's probably one of the hardest things in this life to actually accomplish. But once we've made that decision, what should that look like in our lives? And I'd like to turn to Matthew chapter 9 and read a couple verses there. Matthew chapter 9, and starting verse 35. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, and I want you to get this, and when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered, like sheep having no shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." And that line there about Jesus seeing the multitudes and his heart was moved with compassion. What does that do to me when I see people that, from how I was raised, that they look like they have a pretty rough life. They're in a sense lost and not having a shepherd. I've heard different things, like maybe you see somebody that's homeless along the road or something, and I've heard people say people that are Christians, people say things like, "I'm glad I wasn't raised that way," or "I'm glad I had the family that I did," and then they go on their way, and that is so wrong. Jesus had compassion on these people, and he said they're like sheep without a shepherd. They haven't necessarily rejected God. It's just they don't have somebody that has showed them the way to life. Does that suffering from all the people out there, and you just get out a little bit and you know that there's a lot of people that are lost. What does that do to my heart? And then right at the end, Jesus kind of says something interesting. He says, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." I've often thought, we should we should pray for the lost, that they can come to know Jesus, but that's not really what he said here. And I'm not saying we shouldn't pray for people that haven't heard about Jesus, but he says pray to God that he would send out laborers. In a message I listened to, he was talking about this verse. It's a quote by David Platt. He said, Jesus' concern here says Jesus' concern is not that the lost will not come to the Father, but that the church will not go to the lost. And I think that's unfortunately so true a lot of the times here. Here in America, we have it so nice. What's that?
Can you say it again?
Yeah, I'll read it one more time, sure. He said, Jesus' concern is not that the lost will not come to the Father, but that the church will not go to the lost. And I think we should pray that God will give us boldness to see these needs and pray that, people will go, and maybe pray for ourselves that we will go. And I think that's the essence of Christ's kingdom. When we've realized who Christ is, when we've counted the cost and we've made that decision, now our job is to spread the good news of what we've been given and build the kingdom of God in that way. Just a couple thoughts I'd like to leave with you. Are you a true disciple of Jesus Christ? Does Satan see you as a threat to his kingdom? Do you know who you serve? Have you counted what the cost will be? Is the love of God flowing through you to the lost? And I hope that can be an encouragement, a challenge to each of you. It has been for me in studying these topics a little bit, and I hope that we can come to the end of our life and say that yes, I've been a disciple of Christ and I haven't wasted my life. So yeah, that's what I have for today, and let's close with a word of prayer. Thank you, Father, for your love to us today, and thank you for this direction that you've given us, how to be your disciples, and thank you for giving us that opportunity. Lord, I pray that you would help us to live that out and to show your love to the people around us. God, help us to think seriously about counting the cost and to just be all in once we've made that decision. I just pray that you would help us to say yes to your leading in our lives and help us to grow where we need to. Help us to have a burden for the people that don't know you and to share that with them, with boldness. Thank you for your love, Lord.